All right, guys, Dana White has said some wild stuff since the PFL signed Francis Ngannou. And I want to know, have you heard this? Have you heard the crazy stuff that he has been saying? Going around saying that power slap is the biggest sport in the world ever. He's gone full on Donald Trump, saying it's the biggest sport on social media. It's outpacing every single sport put together ever, which is just so not true. Look at the amount of followers that it has on Instagram. I mean, I haven't seen anything less true and more hyped up since 2020. It's nice. Miss those days of daily lies. Anyway, Dana is on his warpath, and after the last Apex robbery card, he got on his soapbox to talk about the two baddest men on the planet, Jon Jones and Fury. Now, the first thing that I wanted to address to the UFC haters is that, yes, it is Jon Jones and Fury. It's not Jones and Francis. Francis moved away from the hardest mixed martial arts heavyweight division in the world to go to a charity contract for PFL. And Francis had a competitive fight against Ngannou. Jones destroyed Ngannou, absolutely ended his hype train, and made it look shockingly easy. So to put a man who ran away from the hardest mixed martial arts division in the world next to Jon Jones just isn't fair. Straight cope. They're not on the same level. It is what it is. But then Daddy Dana got onto this next crazy thing during the post-fight press conference of the last Fight Night robbery. And he kept going back to it again and again and again. He was calling out Tyson Fury to come over to MMA, which is insane that he's going ahead and doing this. I mean, he has been playing down boxers versus martial artists for the last, 3 years since Jake Paul has really started putting together a run. Now, all of a sudden, it's Dana's favorite thing to talk about. And I think Dana is willing to put some real money behind this. Maybe even run the night at a loss. I'm saying put so much money behind Jones and Fury that even if the pay-per-view sells well, it will still lose money on the night. Obviously, the UFC will make money for the entire year, but I think that's how hard he's willing to go for this. I mean, if he was willing to offer Francis 8 million, Jones 8 million, some people are saying 10 million, just to have those two put together, imagine what sort of numbers Dana would put together just out of spite. So the fact that Dana's doing any of this just seems very out of character for him, especially the character that he's been playing for the last couple of years, which is, I just focus on MMA, I just do the UFC, that's my business, ignoring all the power slap side of things. And then, of course, Jake Paul jumped in with his 2 cents on the whole situation, which makes sense. Jake Paul should do that. Jake Paul is protecting his investment, and he has invested himself in the PFL. He needs the PFL to be successful. And at this point, for the PFL to be successful, they need this Francis Ngannou experiment to work. So obviously, Paul and Ngannou are going to be working together, trying to hype up the PFL as much as they can. Even recently, Fury and Francis have been going back and forth on social media, trying to drum up interest for that one again. The issue I have with that is, if Tyson Fury wanted to fight Francis Ngannou, there has been months for that deal to be signed. Months and months, and that deal has not been signed, which sort of shows me, I mean, it was an April Fool's joke, for God's sake, on Fury's page, on Fury's Twitter page. It was an April Fool's joke. So that sort of shows me that that fight isn't going to happen. That fight has about as much chance of happening as Jones and Stipe Miocic, so a pretty low chance of happening. I believe there's a real war going on behind the scenes here, guys, something that we're not seeing. I don't think it's a coincidence that the PFL came to Vegas and USADA went ruthless on them. UFC and USADA, they're very close. Just look at a couple of examples. There are hundreds more, but just look at a couple of examples. When Max Holloway, a huge UFC superstar, really needed a win over Volkanovski, Volkanovski got a knock on his door at 2 a.m. in the morning while he was preparing for the fight. Israel Adesanya, arguably the UFC's current biggest star, or at least the star that they've invested the most into, he literally grew a boob for one of his most powerful performances. He got no questions asked from USADA, and I believe this year they've only tested him like twice. And some fighters this year are already in the double digits for getting USADA tests. So USADA and the UFC have a history of working together. The USADA helps legitimize the UFC. UFC, you know, pays USADA to test their athletes and maybe pays the USADA to not test some athletes. But the UFC and USADA have a very good working relationship. So I do not think that it's much of a coincidence that after the PFL signs Francis Ngannou, after the PFL starts working closely with Jake Paul, that this has happened to the PFL. They've gone to Vegas, the home of MMA, literally the home of the UFC, and USADA have absolutely torn them apart. And right now the PFL have got this competitive bracket system, which I think is a flawed system, but they've got this competitive bracket system, and if their fighters start popping for steroid use, it's really gonna make a mess of that whole bracket. Guys, let me know down in the comments, do you think a Tyson Fury, John Jones MMA fight has any chance of happening in the UFC? Now, before you say that's a ridiculous idea, remember that we are dealing with a pissed off, on the defensive Dana White. This is the kind of man who single-handedly kept sports going when the entire world closed down for the great overreaction. This man, through sheer spite, moved ahead anyway. You've pissed that guy off and threatened his business. I am so excited to see what happens next. Let me know what you guys think is going to happen next down in the comments. I'll see you in the next video.